We are live for our 3 o'clock Fort Humboldt State Historic Park, Eureka, California. To see who might join us. And we're going to be talking about resilience at Humboldt State Historic Park. Got our first couple of people joining in. Hear me okay? Pop a little comment, a little like, a little love. Let us know that you can see me, you can hear me. Well, you can't see me. Looking out at these beautiful buildings out here on the bluff. It's a beautiful day today for our 3 o'clock Facebook live stream. Thank you for joining. Going from Fort Humboldt State Historic Park today. I see our first like coming in. That must mean you can hear me and see me. Francisco, hello. Go ahead and get started then. Flip this around real quick. Hello, my name is Kyle. I am a park the North Coast State Parks. I work predominantly out of Fort Humboldt, but I bounce around to all kinds of parks, as you may have seen on some of my previous streams. Really quick, I want to recognize a couple of things. First off, I am on ancestral Wiyot land. I like to recognize ancestral Wiyot land here. In my program, I'm going to be talking about the indigenous communities in this area. Wiyot are predominantly what was right here on Humboldt Bay, right near Fort Humboldt, but the indigenous communities all over Humboldt Bay and all over this area. So I just want to recognize that there is no perfect term to refer to groups. Terms like first people to this area, but I want to recognize that in most cases it's best to use the tribe name or ask an individual what they prefer. Also want to recognize so many of you guys are doing your part to help flatten the curve of COVID-19 by staying home, sheltering in place, practicing social distancing. I'm going to be doing the same out here, making sure to wash my hands, making sure to stay 6 feet away from anybody else who might be in our parks right now. We're practicing those things as well. And the reason we do these live streams is to try and give you guys a little piece of the parks that you might be missing. You know, many of you are at home, so we want to bring a little, and also to give you guys something next time you're out in the parks to check out some of these places that we might be showing you that maybe you haven't seen before. Got a hello from Sacramento. Thanks so much. Appreciate you. Robin, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate you guys joining. So again, today I'm going to be talking about resilience as it relates to Fort Humboldt. So I just want to start with asking you, what does resilience mean to you? Maybe think of a time that you've been resilient. Right now is a time that many people are feeling like their resilience is being tested. So think a little bit about what does resilience mean to you, and how have you been resilient before? Maybe a time you've been resilient, or maybe a time that someone else has been resilient and has inspired you. So think about that a little bit. What does this word resilience mean to you? What are some things that are resilient? What are some people that are resilient? So I'm here at Fort Humboldt State Historic Park. This is in Eureka, north coast of California, just south of the Oregon border. And I'm, believe it or not, right in the middle of Eureka. Now this is a park. It may look more developed than some of the other redwood parks you've been seeing here up on the north coast, and that's because it is a lot more developed. This is a historic military fort, as you might be able to tell by some of the buildings around me. But this fort did not ever see a military campaign. This was not in active warfare or anything like that. This fort was established with the job to mitigate conflict between the native people in the area and settlers. So at the time, this was just as the gold rush was starting up, that this place, that people really started coming up to the north coast, right around the 1849, 1850. People really started coming to this area looking for gold. And as they came into this area, just as had been done through the rest of the United States, the people incoming are pushing the native people off their land. The people who have been living here for thousands of years are removed from their ancestral home by the people coming in looking for resources, and in this case looking for gold, and in a lot of cases looking for timber up here in the redwood forest as well. So as they came through looking for new land, new territories, they would just remove the native people from their land, often by force with guns, cavalry and things like that. So eventually the fighting got bad enough that they decided to send US troops up here to intervene in the conflict. And it was their job to mitigate the conflict between the soldiers and mitigate conflict between the native people and the settlers coming into the area. So a lot of what the soldiers did with their time here was they focused on building up this fort, building up these fort buildings, making this place kind of a safe haven for anyone who was seeking aid. They felt that they couldn't really go out and do a whole lot to mitigate this conflict, where the native people wanted to continue living on their ancestral homeland as they had done for thousands of years, and the settlers coming in, as well as immigrants coming into the area, wanted to remove the native people to allow them to extract resources and things like that. So there's a lot of fighting, and eventually the military decided they needed to intervene by sending those troops up here. And again, it was their job to mitigate, not to side with one group or the other. So when they got here, they realized the conflict was pretty complicated, and what they did instead was built up this fort. This building right across from me here is a hospital building, and where they would offer aid to anyone who came and seek it. So native people could come, or settlers could come, kind of seeking asylum. They'd be protected here, and no one would be allowed to mess with them. But right around the start of the Civil War, things really started to change for Fort Humboldt. Mainly that the soldiers who were already serving here were called away to serve in the Civil War. They were called away to help in that conflict. And while most of them ended up fighting for the North, they were allowed to kind of go and fight for whoever they wanted to, wherever they were from. Because the people serving up here had come from all over the place, and many immigrants to the United States as well who were serving here at Fort Humboldt. So, as the soldiers got called away to fight in the Civil War, somebody had to come and fill their place. And in the case of Fort Humboldt, the people who came and filled in was a militia, a group of civilians who were given the same power and authority as a military body. And this militia was called the California Volunteers. And again, this militia is made up of the civilians, the same people who had had a mind for extermination against the native people for so long, who had been wanting to simply remove them from their land and keep them away. There was quite a bit of fighting up here, but just to give you an idea, there was only one documented massacre of the native people attacking the settlers. There was over 50 documented massacres of the settlers going out after the native people. So there was quite a bit of conflict up here. Hello, Sarah from Fort Bragg. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate it. Militia took over, and it was their job again to continue conflict between the settlers and the native people. The militia was made up of the settlers. It was still their job. What the commanding officer of the militia, the California Volunteers, decided to do was to go around to the remaining places they knew there were indigenous people, the remaining communities, round them all up, and bring them all to Fort Humboldt. And while they went out, they collected essentially around 800 people, indigenous people who were living in this area. They brought them all back to Fort Humboldt, and they put them in something called the corral. So the reason they did this was because the commanding officer of the militia said that they didn't have a lot of troops. They didn't have a lot of troops to go out and protect the indigenous people, so if you bring them all to one place, put them all in one place, it's going to make it much easier for the troops to guard them, to protect them, if they're all in one location, right? Regardless, it is what they did. They went out, collected all of these indigenous people, rounded up people, and brought them all back here to the fort. And now, while it wasn't on the proper fort grounds here that I stand on today, it was nearby, and the people responsible for those actions were the ones taking care of Fort Humboldt, who were responsible for manning the fort. So they brought all these people back to the corral. And now the corral was constructed by this militia. It was in 80 feet in diameter and 10-foot tall redwood stockade. So I'm going to walk over here to this field. You can't see it very well from here because I'm a little bit too far away, but I've laid out a rope here in this field. And I'm going to walk around the perimeter of it. This rope is laid out. It is 80 feet in diameter. While it's not a 10 feet tall redwood stockade, I want you to imagine that in this space there is 800 people. So you can start to see the rope here. I'm just going to walk around the outside of it. And the other side, it's a little hard to see because it's a little buried in the grass. But I'll walk around this real quick. So this rope is 80 feet in diameter, and in this space they had around 800 people living, these indigenous people. And now these are people who are used to fending for themselves, who are used to going out and collecting all of their food, hunting, fishing, totally self-sufficient, totally used to taking care of themselves, getting everything they needed from the land, and having plenty of space to do so. But when they were brought here, they were not allowed to leave. They were held in this containment, 800 people. And the oral testimonies of those communities tell us that they were fed out of troughs, that this was their sleeping quarters, this was their restroom, this was everything. This is where they spent all of their time. And again, they were not allowed to leave. The Wiyot word for Fort Humboldt means to draw up one's knees, because this space was so confined that to sit down, they had to pull their knees up to their chest because there were so many people. Again, around 800 people in this confinement. They were fed things that their bodies were not used to, like beef and potatoes, things that the soldiers were used to in their diets, but the native people had not experienced. They were not kept in good conditions. They were not allowed to leave. They were not allowed to take care of themselves. And unfortunately, while they were in this containment, around 200 to 300 people died. These indigenous people kept in these horrible conditions, similar to a slave ship. Thankfully, it was only in operation for a couple months, and a soldier who was still serving here, or a surgeon who was still serving here, complained about the conditions and got the remaining indigenous people released. The corral was taken down, and the remaining people were relocated to reservations around southern Humboldt. So this containment was absolutely awful. While they were also being contained, their cultural artifacts were taken, their regalia, things that are important to their lifeways, their culture, ceremonies. Had been living were essentially raided, and all of those valuable things were taken away from them. The most heartbreaking story that I heard was how regalia for the indigenous has its own spirit, has its own life, and has a song that it sings from the north. And that song is all of the put into it. And the heartbreaking about the is that the people who were in this confinement here and prayers of the people who had made those things for them. They knew it had been made with so much love. And as those things were being taken away and removed from their homes, the people who were stuck in the corral could only stand by and hear their regalia and precious things in their life being taken away where they would never see it again. It's a horrible story, but it is a story of absolute resilience. The people who were kept in these conditions suffered. And besides just the corral, it had years and years of this culture, this lifeway trying to be eradicated. Native people were not allowed to practice their religion, their culture, their ceremonies at all during this time. And many were sent away to boarding schools, which intention was to get this culture out of them entirely. The people in this area, in the Humboldt area, have worked so hard, have been so resilient, the indigenous communities, to keep their cultures alive, to keep their languages alive, and still, in so many ways, they're recovering from these events that happened hundreds of years ago. Well, 800 years ago. The memories of the things that happened here are still with the people, still with the cultures, but they've done so much to revitalize their lifeways after so many efforts. Culture is still alive, the practices are done, and the language is still being spoken. All that these people they have been resilient. Today, what is resilience? Because I think this is such an absolute demonstration of, through all of this hardship, that these people have been so resilient to preserve their life traditions to new generations, despite like 100 years of it trying to be suppressed and erased. Absolutely incredible. So I'd like us to take a moment to think about times that we've been resilient, to hopefully feel a little inspired by these people, to have some resilience in our own battles that we might be facing today. I know that it is a hard time for many of us right now. I know that hopefully that there are better things coming, and that we can all learn from this time and try to take some inspiration from ourselves being resilient. So I want to thank you guys all so much for joining. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I know it was a little bit solemn today, but take inspiration from this story. Think about the ways that this information can be used to make better decisions in the future. A little disconnection. Many of you left in that time, but just want to say about this. There are so many stories like this that need to be told, that we can understand how to kind of move forward to make better relationships in the future. Up here on the North Coast, one of the make amends for so many terrible things that an island that had been used for a world renewal ceremony called Tulawat tribes after that ceremony not being performed for many years. It's a world renewal ceremony, peaceful through multiple on the island, and the island was taken away years ago from these people, and just recently by the city of Eureka. So these stories are important to be told, because there's still room for us to help make amends, and also to understand what's happened in the past to make better decisions moving forward. So I want to thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Check out our live streams every single day at 3 o'clock on our Facebook page. We also have tons of great stuff happening on our YouTube. Parks in Your Home Challenge is getting started, so if you have something in your home, you want to do the interpreter bit, you want to tell us about something really cool, take a shot at it. It's tons of fun, and we love seeing your videos. So again, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow to hear from Maiya and a little bit more about Yurok culture. Also check out the tribal websites to learn more about how they're working to kind of keep these cultures alive and keep the languages alive, things like that. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, pop them down in the chat. I'll be checking. Thank you.